Hey folks, Dave here, and today I have a modding video for you guys. For the past couple of weeks, on and off, I have been working on my first custom building asset for the incredible city Skylines, which I'm already hours and hours into. I still can't resist popping the hood and starting to tinker a bit more past custom terrains and stuff like that. I'll start things off by letting you guys know that this building is already released. It is now on the Steam Workshop, and you can download it with one click of the subscribe button by following the link in the description of this video. I actually had the idea for this structure, this asset, on launch day, and it's just very relevant to my interests. I have created a gun shop and range, and just for fun, I've called it Dave's Tactical Gun Shop and Range. The cool part about this building is it actually serves a function. It's a little bit cheaper than a police station, a little bit cheaper to maintain, less sewage, electricity, and that sort of thing, but it actually helps to train law enforcement and citizens. So, when you place the gun shop in your city, it will then spawn roughly 7 trained police officers that will then drive around your city and fight crime. Because of this, when you place it, your citizens actually enjoy it quite a bit. It has a similar happiness ripple effect to an actual police station. Its range of happiness is a bit further, although the total amount is lower. Right now, once you place Dave's Tactical Gun Shop and Range, both your citizens and your law enforcement can train together to take a bite out of crime. In the future, once we have the ability to then add custom attributes to our assets, I'd like to add a few more things to this building. Right now, it's basically a tweaked basic police station, but in the future, I would like to add a significant amount of noise pollution to encourage city builders to put this structure away from the main part of their city and in kind of a more rural area, or one that just has some space around it. For now though, once you select a template like the police station, you really can't tweak a lot of it, so it'll do for now. It is just placed like a normal police station and then functions like one. It is completely rigged, and citizens will park there and they'll visit, they'll hang out in the back of the range and stuff like that. Another change I'd like to make in the future is adding some custom gunshot sound effects once you zoom in. That, coupled with the noise pollution attribute, would really sell the effect, I think. For those of you looking to make custom buildings of your own, it does require some 3D experience, but there's plenty of tutorials and wikis and stuff like that out there to help you out. I'm going to put a link to the official City Skylines asset importation wiki that will give you the outline of what you need and how to get your assets in game if you already have the 3D experience. And now I'm going to do just a bit of breakdown so you guys can see how I went about creating my building. As I mentioned, I had this idea on launch day, and as I was starting to get into the game in the background, I just spent some time doing some basic blocking out of what I thought a gun range that's kind of shrunken down to fit the City Skylines theme would look like. Of course, buildings like airports and stuff like that aren't full-sized, aren't true to real-life size, so I shrank everything down just a bit and just added the suggestion of size by extending the range out and adding that retaining wall and back area. Buildings don't have to be exactly real-world size, and usually you don't want that because your cities would fill up with these obnoxiously large buildings. Try to hit all of the main points of your structure's outline and silhouette, and just make it look convincing, if not 100% 1-to-1 ratio. You guys can see that I also have a 1.8 meter tall box right here in my scene as I'm modeling. That's a reference point so that I know the average height of a person to make doorways and rooftop levels and stuff like that. Once I had the base building blocked out, I then went on to further detail things, adding areas like doors and windows where I wanted some big billboard signs on the roof. I decided on a flag, but it would have to be a static flag that just kind of drooped because the asset import process does not yet support custom animation. And I just kept on trucking, really just using my imagination to try to imagine what would look good to add noticeable detail to this building without going crazy. I also decided at this point that a lot of the decals and sign textures that you see in the final model would just be texture details and wouldn't be billboard signs. I wanted to have hanging banners and stuff like that on the walls and the sides of the building. Once I had the base building down, I collapsed it into a single mesh, which is required for importing it into City Skylines. I did some import tests with just the empty, untextured mesh, and discovered that there were a couple of scaling issues. I think even using my reference, I had to scale the building to about 1.75 to get it to look right. Additionally, some of the building areas were way too tall, and I ended up scaling the walls larger and the building and range area smaller. This provided a more consistent look to the size of things compared to other buildings and pedestrians and cars in game, but I would end up tweaking the scale of everything on and off probably 4 or 5 more times before I was happy with it. With the mesh basically set in stone at this point, it was time for UVW mapping. I had to map the mesh to get ready for texturing. This is, as with most people, my least favorite part of the process. It involves a very tedious method of you have to break your mesh down into flat faces and get it all to fit onto a single texture sheet. I followed the design document specifications that the City Skylines wiki suggests, and chose a single 1024 squared texture for the entire building. This was a pretty good challenge to get everything fit in, but I'm pretty happy with the overall result. At this point, I was like 12 hours into the process because I did so much tweaking, and I ended up cutting some corners with the texture mapping. As you guys can see, the wood areas right here are kind of just stuck in the corner. I didn't do a lot of custom detailing for the wood on all these little small fence posts and stuff like that. In the end, you're really not going to be able to see anything that I would do, and it was just a matter of trying to save some time and get this UVW map set up quickly. One thing to remember when you're texturing is to try and keep things consistent, space to texture space ratio. You don't want a big area like, say, this rooftop right here to have a tiny little bit of your texture map, because what will happen is it'll be super blurry compared to stuff right next to it. Like you can see, there's many more tiles on this part of the roof, and when you see a super blurry low-res texture right next to a sharper one, especially on an object that's the same object, like this is all one roof, that really stands out to people. So try to keep big objects having the most amount of space possible in your texture map. And I know that sounds obvious, but it's easy to mess up and try to make mistakes like that when you're trying to cram so much into one texture map. Just remember that big stuff requires the most space, and get that in your texture first. Then cram the small stuff around it wherever possible. As I started to texture, I had a couple of other ideas for details. I ended up modeling a couple of extra flags to hang on the walls, actually using a mesh, just because I had some polygons and triangles to spare. I also used some roof pieces to help hide the seams along the roof and provide a nice little shadow and area to shade on the texture. Throughout the texturing and detailing process, I did continue to do import tests to make sure that things were scaling correctly and that all these details were reading well at distance. I probably went overboard with the small details, but it's so much fun to add this little stuff in that I couldn't help myself, and like I said, I did have some polygons and triangles to spare. I added some of these concrete overhangs with the pole supports. That helped to break up the silhouette of the front of the building, which was looking kind of flat in game, and adds a nice front to the parking lot. I also added some pallets of ammo and some gun cases to add that last little bit of detailing, and you can even see some stacked up right in there. I do also want to talk about my texture process just briefly. Once my final diffuse texture, that is the color texture, is complete, I ran it through Crazy Bump, which is a cool app that is a very fast way to iterate normal, specular, and other detail maps. The key thing to remember though is that Crazy Bump is a dumb program. It's just a process. You have to use your brain and get the most use out of the textures that it creates for you. You don't want everything to be bump mapped. For instance, the first pass of Crazy Bump added bump mapping to all of my targets. It made the silhouettes be kind of inset against the rest of the texture. That's just because it does a color comparison and says, oh, this color is darker than this color, this must need some depth, and that's not true. So I let Crazy Bump generate things like the shadows and cracks for the siding, for the shingle detail, the different cracks in the wood and stuff like that. That's good. That needed some bump detailing. I then went through and painted over some flat areas to get rid of bump mapping on the targets, on my logos and signs and stuff like that. You don't want that to have a super crazy looking bevel effect. One other thing to remember is that City Skylines does seem to exaggerate both the normal map, that is the bump map, and the specular and highlight maps as well. So try to go for more subdued amounts of bump mapping and specular details. Speaking of the specular map, like I said, it's really bright in game, so make yours as dark as possible. Anything outside of metal really needs to be almost black or a very dark gray. Any areas of your specular map that are white are going to be 100% reflective window texture in game. This is a nifty way just to quickly put a window in that will be automatically generated on your building. I had some barred windows on my building. I think they're all barred actually. And so I just mapped the bar area to a simple gray, dark gray texture, and then made all of the window area in between the bars 100% reflective. That gives a nice little window effect in between the bars, and the doors have a nice window effect as well. With the majority of the hard work complete and everything sized correctly and the function of the building tested in-game, it was time for the really fun part. The asset editor in City Skyline is just a blast to use. Once I got my building exactly how I wanted it and had the tiles set up correctly and all the attributes for the building, it was just a matter of adding all of these cool little animated props and details to the overall mesh. I made sure to add some trees to the backstop to help add some convincing just back area to the range where it's not just backed up against someone's house or some other part of someone's city. I also made sure to rig this building correctly with the invisible rigs. Now, what I'm referring to here is not just the visual parking lots that you can place, but the invisible rigs. This tells the game where to navigate AI cars and where they should be parking. I also place invisible markers to tell the game where the doors for my building are and where people should congregate in the back area near the range. This allows pedestrians who visit this building to actually walk up and disappear inside the door, and even hang out and stand in the back range area. It's real simple to do, and looks pretty cool. I also added tons of little range decals like metal barrels and wire spools for people to load their firearms on to use as targets. I tried to not go too crazy, but I still ended up pretty close to the 64 prop limit. The key is, don't detail everything that you can think of. Try to spread your assets and your props out when you're detailing your buildings so that it creates a convincing effect without having a super dense amount of props. Add just a couple of benches instead of 10 benches. Add just a couple of potted plants instead of the 20 that you might want to. I did have to add one last little Easter egg though. If you guys look carefully, you can even see a secret entrance in the back right there. There's going to be some kind of concrete bunker underneath this thing. My final polygon count is 1,412 with a triangle count of 2,838. And there you have it, guys. That is how I spent, I'd say, at least 25 hours or so creating my first building asset for City Skylines. Now, I'm not convinced that I'm going to be making a lot of these just because I already have other freelance commitments that, actually pay money, and this is quite a time sink, but I cannot say that I didn't enjoy almost every step of this process. The mod support is incredible in City Skylines, and when you add that on top of such a very fun game, it is very tempting to dive back in and keep making stuff like this. Don't forget, you guys can download this building in the description and add it to your cities. If you do, send me a message or a screenshot, either on Twitter or here in the YouTube comments, and show me Dave's Tactical Gun Shop in your city. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll catch you all next time.